Tonight on Bridge City News, members of the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees were out in full force at the Chinook Hospital today, protesting what they call massive cuts to health care. The cold winter snap we recently had wiped out a lot of our province's pine beetles. We hear from a biological science professor from the U of A who has the details. And even more Canadian troops have been deployed to Newfoundland and Labrador to help those dig out of last week's massive snowstorm.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. A rally was held at the Chinook Regional Hospital earlier today by members of the AUPE who were protesting healthcare cuts. Close to 300 union members were out calling on the province to stop what it calls waging war on the healthcare industry and public sector employees.
We have a government that is more interested in looking after huge corporations by giving them huge tax breaks, rather than looking after the actual people that elected them to serve the people. And that's a huge concern for us, and it should be a concern for all Albertans.
What we're hoping is that Mr. Kenney and then Mr. Taves, the finance minister, will think about what they're going to do in the budget and realize that making cuts to the public service is not going to solve the problems that we have in Alberta economically. And balancing the books at the cost of our public services is simply a ridiculous idea. And what we'll do is rob us of the public services that we all rely on. It will exacerbate the economic problems through job loss, and it will make us a weaker province when we need to be the strongest we've ever been.
The AUP is Western Canada's largest union with more than 96,000 members. Lethbridge East MLA Nathan Newdorf says he can understand the frustration of union members, but says some tough choices need to be made in order to help Alberta get back to black and a balanced budget.
I just think that these things do come about on a fairly regular basis. It is quite normal for this kind of protest to take place during negotiation, particularly when we're seeking change to control costs as we go forward. And I do think all of Alberta is aware of our fiscal situation, that we have to do things to make sure that we're being responsible with the money and funds that we have. And we're taking a deeper look at some of the items within these contracts at this time when the contract is open and it's appropriate to do so. There will be things that the unions and other sides agree with and things that they don't, and that's part of the process.
Lethbridge City Council heard about the feasibility of an Indigenous Cultural Centre yesterday. Perry Stein, the Indigenous Relations Advisor, says a safe centre is needed to help keep Indigenous culture alive in our region.
Over the course of the last 5 or 6 months, we've had a really robust engagement program. We've engaged members of the urban Indigenous community, Lethbridge residents at large, and also members of the Blackfoot Confederacy Nations and the Métis Nation. Things that we've been hearing from the community are that first off, an Indigenous Cultural Centre is something that people are quite interested in and keen for. There seems to be quite an opportunity or a gap in the community from a tourism perspective, from a cultural perspective, from a health and wellness perspective. People are looking for something like this to help either bridge the gaps between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, or provide opportunities for people to connect back to 10, 15,000 years of Blackfoot history in this area.
For the average Lethbridge resident, winter weather usually means a slower commute and a few minutes outside shoveling the walkway. But for the homeless, winter is much more than that and can pose major risks. One Lethbridge man who used to be homeless wants to give back. As Loris Alexander explains, he's doing so with blankets.
Sterling Anderson once looked down on the destitute, attributing their homelessness to negligence.
Prior, my views are, they're lazy, they just need to, maybe read some self-help books, read some motivation books.
Anderson's views have since changed when he himself experienced homelessness last February, and it was negligence that got him there.
I struggled with mental illness, depression, anxiety, Asperger's, and I just kind of felt like a black sheep in the flock, and I just kind of felt tired of it all.
Anderson says it taught him humility. He sought help.
I had to learn to ask for help first, because prior I had a very low opinion of help. I thought that one could get along in the world by his own bootstraps.
After a lot of reflection, Anderson has made it a goal to help bring warmth to those on the streets. No judgment, just blankets and winter clothing.
Over the last year, I've kind of tried to be a little bit more charitable and do kind of small acts of charity to try and balance out the selfishness that I held.
If you would like to donate blankets to help with Anderson's initiative, drop-off centers include Streets Alive, the Soup Kitchen, and the Supervised Consumption Site. For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
There's a growing movement in Lethbridge dedicated to celebrating play. The first ever Play Summit took place this afternoon at the Lethbridge Public Library. Mayor Chris Spearman signed the Play Charter, which enforces a child's right to play. Vicki Hazelwood with the Lethbridge Early Years Coalition says the Play Charter helped to create a unified voice.
The Lethbridge Play Charter was put together by over 25 organizations in our community that value play and value youth and children having play as a priority in their lives.
One of the lightning presentations during the Lunch and Learn will be presented by the Lethbridge Sport Council, and we'll be talking about our roving gym programs that we've been offering. So roving gyms is actually a program that started with the Lethbridge Early Years Coalition, and this winter the Lethbridge Sport Council has taken it over. We got in a couple of fantastic grants, so we were able to buy lots of new equipment, and so we offer the roving gyms at various locations around the city on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and it's just a free play space for children and their caregivers to come and play and be active.
For more information on roving gyms, visit lethbridgesportcouncil.ca. The town of Taber announced today that it has decided to move forward in purchasing land which will become the future home of the new Taber Chamber of Commerce. The town purchased 1.3 acres of land located at 5431 47th Avenue. Town Council says it's another way to help drive Taber's economic growth as its business community continues to expand. The new location will allow the Chamber greater exposure being visible from Highway 3. The Chamber will be responsible for costs associated with their new building. No word yet on when construction will begin. We may have survived last week's extreme cold snap, but experts are hoping mountain pine beetles did not. Temperatures around Jasper, Hinton, and Sundre, which are key battlegrounds in the fight against pine beetles, dipped below -40 during the polar vortex. University of Alberta Biological Sciences professor Janice Cook says early projections show it might have been enough to wipe out more than 95% of the pine beetle larvae.
The temperatures were so low that we see really significant winter kill of mountain pine beetles. A pair of mountain pine beetles can easily produce 40 offspring. So you can imagine that if none of those offspring are killed by winter temperatures, then they're all going to grow up to be beetles, and that's going to be a huge increase in the population year over year over year. Having these winter killing temperatures 2 years in a row, it doesn't kill all the beetles, but it kills a lot of them. Lethbridge is on the route to another important pine forest that has also been impacted heavily by mountain pine beetle, and that's Cypress Hills. So I would like to remind all of your viewers in the Lethbridge area to not transport firewood, because this is one way that we can introduce mountain pine beetle to those precious forests and possibly cause even more damage than the natural spread of the beetle itself.
A spokesperson from Alberta Forestry says it typically takes a few years of large-scale cold events to cause notable mortality rates in pine beetles. It appears as though there will not be a new gondola for Banff National Park. Parks Canada rejected a proposal for a cable car that would have taken skiers and hikers from the Banff town site to the summit at Mount Norquay. The project has been put forward by the resort's owner. Parks Canada says the gondola idea did not fit well with policies on limits to development in the national park. Canada's Defence Minister Harjit Sajjan says 450 troops have now been deployed to help Newfoundland and Labrador dig out of last week's nasty monster snowstorm.
We'll have about approximately 175 reservists in total with the regular force. The IRU that has been brought in. We'll have about 450 personnel, and doing everything from, as I stated yesterday, from helping to shovel snow for the vulnerable, making sure that we check on people that need to be checked on also, and making sure that if we can assist with transportation. Well, I mean, it'll be up to about 450. They're moving in. I mean, it's going to fluctuate, right? That was was the estimate that we were going to have probably by the end of today. The military leadership is talking to the provincial emergency response folks. They get an idea of what's needed. But one of the things we want to do is lean forward very quickly to getting people on the ground as quickly as possible, more importantly with the numbers that are needed. And then we can work out those details, and that's something that's happening automatically.
7 people were taken into custody yesterday outside of the Co-op refinery in Regina for disobeying a court order. Unifor posted a video on Twitter showing police taking the union's national president, Jerry Diaz, and Western Regional Director, Gavin McGarrigle, into custody. A judge ruled last month that the union could stop vehicles from trying to get in and out of the refinery for a maximum of 10 minutes, so to provide information on the labor dispute. Diaz says the blockades do not violate the court order because the court injunction was against Unifor Local 594. He said blockades outside of the refinery yesterday were by the national union. The amount of unpaid property taxes that oil and gas companies owe in Alberta has doubled over last year. Rural Municipalities Alberta said in a survey of its members shows that they owed a total of $173 million. That is a 114% increase compared to last spring. The association's president, Al Khimir, said if Alberta's property tax system is not amended to prevent oil and gas companies from refusing to pay property taxes, many rural communities will struggle to remain viable. Property taxes on energy facilities are overseen by the province and not by local municipalities. The first stage of an extradition hearing for Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou has begun. She's accused of violating U.S. sanctions against Iran.
The defense argued a lot of the issue of double criminality. Basically, their argument is, since Canada does not have sanctions against Iran, Meng Wanzhou did not commit any crimes. Since she didn't commit a crime in Canada, she can't be extradited to the United States. That's the argument. They have charged her with 13 counts of fraud. Their argument is Huawei had a company called Skycom that did business in Iran, violating U.S. sanctions. She was allegedly in 2013 had a meeting with the HSBC Bank in Hong Kong, in which she basically, the allegation is that she lied and said, no, Skycom is an independent company, they don't have any dealing with Iran, Huawei is not dealing with Iran, and this is where the allegations of fraud come from.
Canada's ambassador to China, Dominic Barton, will be testifying before a new special parliamentary committee created to examine our relationship with China. All parties agreed it was important to hear from Barton, despite some differences of opinion on the timing.
Today, we are here to start with the Canada-China Committee to be able to investigate all aspects of the relationship between Canada and China, not limited to diplomatic, economic, security, consular. The Conservatives have sent a letter to Dominic Barton, the ambassador to China, because it's very important to have the opportunity to hear from him first as the government's representative in China, to understand the lay of the land and the status, as well as to understand the government's strategy and approach toward China. I have heard back from the ambassador in an email, and he said that he is ready and willing to attend the committee at our convenience, and so I am hoping that our colleagues on this committee will approve this Conservative motion that we'll be tabling at committee.
Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland says Ottawa is trying to find common ground with people and politicians across the country. She was in Winnipeg yesterday and said Canadians must all remain united.
I think there is a profound commitment to Canada across our country. I think there is a profound appreciation in this time of tremendous global uncertainty and tremendous global challenges, whether they are geopolitical or economic. What I heard from people was an appreciation of how remarkable Canada is, and that we need to be committed together to keeping Canada strong, keeping Canada united, keeping Canada able to act together to address the pressing challenges of our time.
Thousands of gun rights activists from across the United States rallied at the Virginia Capitol to protest plans by the state to pass gun control legislation that has become a key flashpoint in the national debate over gun violence.
Stand up for our rights as they're trying to infringe upon. I got family in Virginia. You know, they passed some of these laws. I won't be able to freely travel with the way I travel, you know, to protect my family. So if, I don't come and help support and they pass some of these laws they're trying to do, it restricts my access to my family.
I believe in the Second Amendment. I believe that we have the right to arm ourselves, not only to protect ourselves, but to guard our country against any kind of tyranny, a tyrannical government, or anything like that.
Police in Phoenix, Arizona say 3 children were found dead inside of a home. Police say the kids, aged 2, 3, and 7 months, were found unresponsive after officers administered CPR and fire officials provided first aid.
I can tell you guys that this is probably one of the most difficult calls that our officers and fire personnel respond to. It's the most difficult part to see children who are the most innocent that have obviously lost their lives. So it's very difficult, and we're trying to determine why this occurred. And those are the questions that we're going to hopefully get answers to when investigators speak to the family.
Many couples visit countries around the world to go on missions trips. Last August, a couple from Northern Ireland had their lives changed forever when they visited Pakistan. As we hear in this next report, the couple is now part of a charity called Rescue Their Cry to help countless children who are enslaved.
A Christian couple from Northern Ireland are on a mission to rescue child slaves in Pakistan after a life-changing trip to the country where they saw firsthand the exploitation of those known as the brickyard children. Maurice and Maureen Wiley have launched a charity called Rescue Their Cry to help set these young people free from this life of slavery. Maureen says one of the first things they were able to provide was clean drinking water for these enslaved children.
Working in the heat of the day, some unclothed, permanent marks on their shoulders from carrying the bricks, and yet here they were, waiting on water, being pumped out for the first time. But I've never seen children so desperate to get a drink before, to keep them healthy, to keep them alive really. And I think that was the part that touched the most, was seeing that these are lives that we can help.
Wiley concluded by explaining how they're seeking to provide long-lasting freedom to these young lives through a rescue centre called the Ark.
So our objective at this moment is keep them alive as best we know how to do, with the future prospects of bringing them out. Teaching them, we have teachers at hand ready to teach them. We've been promised that they can get jobs in a secure city. And once they have built up a revenue of income for themselves and know how to manage life again, really, then they can go forward. And that's why it's going to be called the Ark. We're going to call this the Ark because this is them coming out 2 by 2. And we do believe that that's what God has given us, and they can then go forward and walk in the fullness of who they're meant to be in this life.
Peter Wooding for the Global News Alliance.
And they're doing tremendous work. Beautiful to see. The meltdown continues for our region thanks to a Chinook. That Chinook arch will be staying with us for quite some time. Full weather details are on deck. The Chinook arch remains over much of southwestern Alberta. Jeanette Roche is here now with a complete look at the weather picture. And Jeanette, it feels a little bit like spring out there.
Yeah, it sure does, Hal, and here's the reason why. Our high temperature today was 6 degrees. The low overnight going to 0, not too bad at all. Tomorrow's high, 5 degrees, tons of sunshine was in the forecast today and tomorrow, so as we continue on with the lovely Chinook weather that we've been having. Let's look ahead to the 5-day forecast. We've got a lot of nice weather in store for us as well here. Thursday's high, 7 degrees. And then we jump up into a double digit there for Friday, 11-degree high. 8 degrees is the high on Saturday and 5 degrees on Sunday, giving us a lovely weekend ahead of us. 4 degrees will be the high on Monday. Tons of sunshine over the next 5 days with a little bit of scattered clouds there. ALMANAC highs and lows. -2, they tell us, is the average high. -14, the average low. The high temperature on this day was 16 degrees. That was in 1942. And the lowest was a freezing -41. That was in 1943. The sun rose this morning at 8:18 a.m. and it set this evening at 5:07 p.m., giving us a teeny little bit more sunshine than we had yesterday. Looking into tomorrow's highs across the nation, the West Coast will see some scattered showers tomorrow. Victoria and Vancouver both expecting highs of 8 degrees. 2 degrees expected in Edmonton and 3 degrees in Calgary. Chance of snow up in Edmonton. Mix of sun and cloud kind of across Alberta tomorrow. Saskatoon and Regina, we're going to be seeing some clouds there. -5 is the high in Saskatoon. Regina -4 and -8 is the high tomorrow in Winnipeg with some scattered clouds there as well. Lots of sunshine expected tomorrow in Toronto with their high being 1 degree. Flurries expected in Ottawa. 0 is their high. 0 is also the high in Montreal tomorrow with some scattered clouds there. Now over in Atlantic Canada, Fredericton's high -4 tomorrow. Same thing for Halifax. Charlottetown will be expecting a nice day with lots of sunshine. -5 is their high. St. John's, Newfoundland, however, -6 as they get away from the snow, but they're still in a state of emergency today. It has been lifted a bit so people can get out and get some groceries. The international airport is expected to not be open before tomorrow. That's your forecast.
Economists say the outbreak of a new coronavirus in China that has sickened more than 200 people is developing into a major potential economic risk to the Asia-Pacific region. The Chinese government's announcement of a 4th death saw markets in Shanghai, Tokyo, Hong Kong, and Sydney retreat. Authorities say some infections were transmitted person to person. That increased the risk of the disease that it might spread faster during China's busiest travel season, the Lunar New Year holiday. That prompted the selling of shares in airlines, hotel operators, and other travel-related companies. Canadian manufacturing sales dropped for a 3rd straight month in November. Stats Canada says the value of sales fell 0.6% from the previous month to $57 billion. Sales were down in 11 of 21 industries, representing 55% of total manufacturing sales. The biggest declines came in the primary metal, chemical, and food industries. They were offset, however, by higher sales in transportation and fabricated metal industries. The CEO of Mountain Equipment Co-op says changes are underway for the Vancouver-based outdoor apparel and goods retailer. Phil Arata says the goal is to return his company to a financially healthy state. The company reported a net loss of $11.49 million last year compared to an $11.75 million profit in 2018. Arata says the company converted more than 950 jobs classified as casual into full and part-time positions. Those employees now receive benefits and an RRSP matching plan. Losing your job can be devastating. How will you pay your mortgage or even feed your family? Brian Dykema is the Vice President of External Affairs of the think tank Cardis, and he says when you lose your job, it affects more than just your bank account.
You're not going to work just by yourself and working in a sort of a walled-in environment. You're working with colleagues. You have people that you work with projects on that you talk to. And when that disappears, it's a loss of more than just some numbers in your bank account. And I think that's what we're trying to do with this paper. We're trying to show the broad effects of losing work and the broad positive effects of working for all people.
Brian will have more on how a job loss can impact your health to the point of even causing a potential car accident. That's coming up after business news. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 25 points in the day to 17,572. The Dow was down 152 points to 29,196. The S&P 500 was down almost 9 points on the day to 3320. The Nasdaq was down 18 points to 9370. Oil was down 20 cents to 58.34 per barrel. Natural gas was down 10 cents to $1.91. Gold was down 7 cents to 15.58 per ounce. And silver was down 14 cents to $17.64 an ounce. Wheat is at $232 per metric ton, barley's at $237, canola's at $4.79, and corn is at $278 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 3 cents to $126.55. Feeder cattle were down 28 cents to $145.25. Lean hogs were down 33 cents to $68. The Canadian dollar was down slightly on the day to 76.49 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, another protest involving the AUP was held in Lethbridge earlier today. This one took place at the Chinook Hospital. About 300 union members say the government is waging war on workers in the healthcare industry. Lethbridge East MLA Nathan Newdorf said many industries will feel the effects of a government which is trying to get its financial house in order. Recent major clashes in Lebanon have left more than 400 people injured. We have an update next from our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari. That interview is on deck. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here is your Bridge City News Community Calendar. Night to Shine is an event sponsored by the Tim Tebow Foundation and hosted by My Victory Lethbridge on Friday, February 7th. Night to Shine is an unforgettable prom night experience for people with special needs ages 14 and older. This complimentary event begins on a red carpet with guests receiving the royal treatment, including hair and makeup stations, limousine rides, a catered dinner, and much more. For details and to register, visit myvictory.ca. And if you'd like to volunteer, email carol@myvictory.ca. Do you have a flair for the dramatic and great comedic timing? Shakespeare in the Park is holding auditions for the 2020 season of Shakespeare's comedy, The Merry Wives of Windsor, on Friday, January 31st from 7 to 9 p.m. in the ATB Community Room at CASA. Come prepared to present a 1 to 2 minute monologue. To sign up, email steph.savage88@gmail.com. Blankets for Canada Lethbridge meets Thursdays from 10 a.m. to noon at Southminster United Church. Share your knitting and crocheting skills to keep those who are in need in our community warm. Donations of yarn and financial gifts are greatly appreciated and can be dropped off at the church. For more information, visit blanketsforcanada.ca or call 403-329-6586. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is apparently close to finalizing a rule that would allow U.S. President Trump's team to move to dismiss the articles of impeachment in the Senate quickly after some new evidence has apparently been presented. To talk more about it is our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari. Lisa, what would some of this new evidence actually look like?
You know, this is the legal dream team's work, I assume, that President Trump announced over the weekend, that he has Ken Starr and Alan Dershowitz. You know, in our time, these two have been, you know, the biggest, best, most celebrity type attorneys out there. And of course, Donald Trump's going to go after the best. That's what he does best, is to recruit and to find and hire the best of the best. So now they've put out certain buzzwords that would consider the articles to be thrown out. That you know, these two individuals, particularly Alan Dershowitz, whose work I follow and have followed for years because I just find him to be very even-keeled and particularly intelligent in understanding the Constitution, find that this impeachment is unconstitutional. So anything that they throw out right now in terms of evidence is to say, well, you know, this is just, it's going to set a precedent in our country should this go forward, and should we impeach a president on very shaky grounds. Their main issue is that this is a partisan impeachment, meaning it's just color war at the end of the day. So we'll see how quickly we can get rid of this. And I mean, it's not soon enough, because for people who actually want to follow the news, this has really been in the way and really distracting of what's important.
Some influential Iranian artists and TV personalities have publicly broken with Tehran after the government denied for a number of days that it shot down that Ukrainian passenger jet on January 8th, killing 176, including 57 Canadians.
Yeah, this is a very important story. I mean, you know, it's very difficult for people living in Iran to go against the regime. I mean, there are such serious repercussions to that, and anywhere from arrest to being hanged to being, you know, having to escape the country, not being able to work, not being able to post on social media, having your family members arrested, having to pay heavy fines, and the list goes on. In this case, we have already heard of a very prominent chess player, the only Olympic winner, a female taekwondo artist who has fled the country to Germany, and one of my favorite actresses who has almost 6 million followers on Instagram, took to Instagram to say, you know, we're all prisoners basically of this regime. Another anchor came on air and said, I've been lying to you for 13 years, because of course when you work in journalism in that country, you are working to protect and to defend the regime and its mouthpieces. So this is a big shift in what we've seen for 40 years, which has been disenchantment with the regime, and we've seen scattered protests here and there. But to have these very influential individuals come out, I think it sets a tone, and it shows unity, and it shows that the people can actually unite. And when they do, what will it mean for this regime? And I've always said the Achilles heel of this regime is not sanctions, and it's not the United States, and it's not the Europeans or any government body. It's the people back at home who have the potential to go out there and to create a revolution. And we know that the only thing that this regime wants is to stay in power, to spread its influence and stay in power. So if that becomes jeopardized, that becomes a serious issue for this regime.
And you have to feel as well for the people who are speaking out that their lives may be at risk too. That's why many are fleeing, right?
Absolutely. I mean, if you open up your mouth, if you say those things about the regime, you can't stay there. You're going to be arrested. Your family members will be arrested. I mean, there are repercussions for Iranians who live in the United States and all over Europe who speak out about the regime. Their family members back at home are arrested. The phone lines are tapped. Their computers are confiscated. I've covered dozens of these stories where there's backlash for people, their loved ones back at home, even when they're able to flee the country. So, I mean, this regime has they muzzle the message, and they have done so for 4 decades. So it's going to be very difficult, and like you said, a very high price to pay for those who do want to speak out.
A new report from the Jerusalem Post says Iran's nuclear weapons, Lisa, go back to 2002. Germany, France, and the UK have put Iran on notice over various nuclear deal breaches.
Yeah, we've known, and there have been numerous reports by different accountability bodies that the Iranian regime was going against the nuclear deal, and they were continuing with their nuclear program. We already know that. Now, add to that since the U.S. withdrew from that nuclear deal in May of 2018 and subsequently did not enter into a new deal with the Iranians, they have announced that they will enrich more uranium, that they will continue with they've become so emboldened in getting this message out as propaganda. And more recently than ever, after the killing of Qasem Soleimani in recent weeks, they've come to say, we are going to double and triple our uranium enrichment. We are going to put our weapons program on fast forward. I mean, this is what they believe that will get the world's attention. This is what they believe are their ability to brag and to flex their muscles is through their nuclear program, which is what the world was waiting to see. Now, if they're trying to get the Europeans to sign on to another deal, this does not look good. This is not a situation where the Europeans can look past all these statements and look past this nuclear program that's continuing to say, we want to enter into a deal with you just to have a trade partner in Iran. They put them on notice. They continue this kind of like chicken and egg kind of thing and saying, look, we beg you to sign on to the deal, but at the same time, we're mad at you if you don't. And it's made a very awkward situation for the Europeans. They won't easily be able to sign on with the United States, obviously, and the UK, having a very stern message about how they should not continue to have relations with the Iranian regime.
There were some major clashes in Lebanon over the weekend, leaving 400 people wounded. Lisa, Lebanese authorities are bracing for more violence after a night of protests in Beirut. The clashes took place amid a worsening financial crisis and an ongoing impasse over the formation of a new government.
Yes, not too many reports on Lebanon. I think people are looking the other way. We had a long period of time where obviously the reports were more about Iran, Iraq, Qasem Soleimani, Syria even, but not about Lebanon and the ongoing protests there. Very shaky situation. They don't want the current government, but they also have obviously influences from Lebanon, from Hezbollah rather in Lebanon, Hezbollah being the terrorist organization that has been funded by the Iranian regime since its inception. So for almost 4 decades, the Iranians have relied on proxy proxy groups such as Hezbollah, their first one, to do their dirty work in the Middle East, to destabilize the Middle East, to be this cancerous terrorist element in the Middle East. And since then, Hezbollah has been this cancerous element in Lebanon and in creating not just Hezbollah, but other splinter groups and terrorist organizations that have been on the ground creating these insurgencies and creating the instability there. What will be the future of the Middle East? It's a very, very sensitive issue because you see these ingredients in so many of the countries of the Middle East. You have a population that's ready to raise up against its government, the population outgrowing these governments, whether it be a theocracy, whether it be a monarchy, whether it be a prime minister that's been in office too long. They want better, they want more, but they don't have the ability to move forward. What do they want? How can they organize? In the case of Lebanon, they do have elections. They have a rather modern leader, but here you see them saying, we want these terrorist elements out. We want better. We want to be ourselves again. Speak to anybody who's been to the Middle East in the 70s. They'll talk about Beirut as the Paris of the Middle East. Not something I lived through, but something I have heard much about, seen pictures and videos from. So I think many of the nationalists there want to go back to that and rid themselves of this terrorist influence.
China is confirming 139 new cases of pneumonia over the weekend. The virus is apparently spreading to many of the major cities. The Asian nation is increasing measures to contain the outbreak.
Yeah, this was very interesting. This was a mysterious virus at first. I mean, it still is to some extent because they had not seen anything like it before. They said that it's similar to pneumonia, but they have had deaths, and because of that, they're looking very, very closely at what this is, how it's spreading. They're looking at the airport and how they're looking at individuals coming in to prevent the further spreading of this virus. There are lists online about symptoms that people could watch out for. We have not heard of this spreading anywhere beyond that area, but obviously it's of concern to, since the advent of an airplane, people should worry about viruses everywhere, spreading anywhere and very easily spreading. So I think that's why they are taking precautions in airports in China, and especially in those areas where they know there are people that have had this virus.
Mexican authorities have closed a border entry point in southern Mexico recently after thousands of Central American immigrants tried to push their way across a bridge between Mexico and Guatemala. Authorities say there were around 2,500 migrants on the bridge.
Yes, this is the latest migrant caravan. Most of those individuals originating from the country of Honduras and Mexico very early on, saying we are going to stop them before they get close to the U.S. border. This signals to me that there have been some more collaborating between the United States and Mexico on border security. If they're working together, that's a very positive sign, and we can, obviously work together to create safer environments and safer borders and safer border towns on both sides of the border, both for Mexico and the United States. As you know, there have been a very high number of crimes and kidnappings and murders on the border on the Mexican side, and because of that, I think it behooves Mexico to obviously take a very serious stance with regards to these caravans, with regards to immigration, with regards to illegal immigration, etc. So now this particular caravan, this latest one, is stuck, for lack of a better word, by Guatemala. And what will happen to them, who knows? But again, we have to understand what conditions these people leave in order to find better life on the road. And when they pack up, there's so much uncertainty in the life that they will find and how far they will get. Will they get to Guatemala? Will they get to Mexico? Will they get to the United States? And obviously that being the end goal for most, if not all, of these migrants.
Lisa, the city of San Antonio, Texas is spending $300,000 plus to keep Chick-fil-A out of their airport?
Yes, and that that price tag, that hefty price tag that the city of San Antonio has paid is to legal fees in order to keep this very popular franchise, Chick-fil-A, out of its airport because they disagree with the stance of the franchise against LGBTQ minorities. And because of that, they don't want them to have a place in their airport. As you know, Chick-fil-A, the franchise, is owned by a religious family. They close on Sundays. Very popular. I don't know if you guys have Chick-fil-A out in Canada.
One in Toronto.
Sure.
That's it.
But oh, okay. But in the States, it's very popular. The lines are always out the door, and the drive-throughs are sometimes for miles in traffic. But it's a very popular franchise. But obviously, there is a movement against the religious beliefs of the owners of that franchise. So the city of San Antonio is standing firm and saying, we don't want you here. We don't believe in your stance. And I don't know, how can you juxtapose a chicken sandwich with political and religious views? We've come to that place.
And I know the people that have had it, they said it's amazing chicken. You know, it's pretty amazing. Now, here's a kind of a cool story. The next U.S. Navy aircraft will be named after an African-American Pearl Harbor hero, Dory Miller. The official announcement will be made on Martin Luther King's birthday.
Yes, exactly right. I was just about to say how apropos that the announcement is being made on Martin Luther King Day, and how wonderful to commemorate these individuals in history, regardless of their race, religion, creed, etc. People who've been a part and on the right side of history, and to honor them, their legacy, their families, and for all the wonderful work and all the contributions that they made to this country. I think with everything going on, and you have celebrities and athletes and people who shouldn't be opining about current events and national security and all other stories, take to their social media pages and say such awful things about this country and about our leaders. And you always are fearful that will leave a stain. This president will be out of office, but this pop culture will remain, and it'll become part of our culture. And when you hear about stories like this, it's heartwarming to say that we should take a moment to stop, to teach our children, to teach in schools, to teach, these are the icons and these are the quote-unquote influencers that we should be following and honoring, frankly, and how wonderful to be doing that on Martin Luther King's birthday.
Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles, California. Thanks so much, Lisa.
My pleasure.
A new report says Canadian business leaders, unions, and governments may not be prepared for the next economic downturn without taking a new approach to employment and labor. Joining me now to talk about it from Hamilton, Ontario is Brian Dykema. Brian is the VP of External Affairs at the think tank Cardis. He also co-wrote a report called Work is About More Than Money. So Brian, apparently when we go through the difficult time of losing a job, it is much more than just the money aspect, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. We're inclined to think of our work as something that we do to put bread on the table. It gets a paycheck, and certainly that's part of it. And we all love it when the paycheck comes in. But it's about much more than that. Work is an identity for many people. They see themselves as say, for instance, I'm a plumber is a sort of classic example of somebody identifying with their work. It's a routine. The fact that every morning you get up, you have something to do, something to go to, is, I think, a huge part of it. It's something that it's a way for you to give back. I think that's an underappreciated aspect of work, that when people go to work, they're creating something. They're creating something that helps other people, whether it's a television program like what you're doing, or whether it's a pipeline that's going to take fuel to somebody who needs to heat their home, or whether it's care for somebody to offer in a hospital. Those are things in which you can contribute to the society as a whole. When you lose that, it's really, really bad for people, it seems.
So when someone loses their job, how much does that really impact them emotionally?
Well, it's a tremendous loss. I mean, you can see this in a variety of different ways. Some of the statistics show that losing a job increases your likelihood that you'll die. In fact, it's, people sometimes think of work as simply a way of life, but for many people it's life. There's studies have shown that for both men and women, there's a sort of short-term increase in death that follows the loss of a job. particularly for young men. There's a lot of negative effects, increased use of drugs, of alcohol, substance abuse of all kinds, cardiovascular disease, a number of other things, all kinds of negative effects. In fact, it's so prevalent, the negative effects, that on the flip side, you think, if a doctor had any pill that they could prescribe someone, it would be a job. It would be 40 hours a week, go to work, and it could do a lot of good for people, and that's true as well.
And the tough part as well, Brian, is not to take it personally. When the company says, no, this is all about numbers, just budget cuts, try not to take it personally, but it doesn't get much more personal than not being able to provide for your family, right?
That's right. It's a livelihood. It's a sort, as I said earlier, a sort of sense of who you are. And many of us get up for work and we enjoy giving back to it, right? We enjoy the community. That's part of it. That's another part I didn't mention earlier. You're not going to work just by yourself and working in a sort of a walled-in environment. You're working with colleagues. You have people that you work with projects on, that you talk to. And when that disappears, it's a loss of more than just some numbers in your bank account. And I think that's what we're trying to do with this paper. We're trying to show the broad effects of losing work and the broad positive effects of working for all people.
Some of your coworkers actually become family members at the same time. I know some employees like to complain about their jobs. I mean, there's no perfect job out there, maybe a perfect job for you, but I wonder how many people are really fulfilled by their positions and their careers.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. One of the things that I want to make clear is that we're not talking about all jobs as any job, whether it's working in a sort of a salt mine is going to be satisfying or fulfilling. There's lots of evidence to show that the type of work actually matters as well. So, for instance, one of the things that we've discovered in our paper and in surveying the literature is that people who are employed tend to volunteer more, right? So you would think that somebody who's employed would have less time because they're so busy working, but it seems that people who work on a regular basis actually volunteer more, give back to their community. When they lose that goes away as well. But it's important to note it's not just any type of job, it's the regular, stable, predictable job. So somebody could have a job and the job is unpredictable. They don't know whether they're going to be working the next day or whether they're going to be working 2 days. They're concerned about the sort of stability of it. And that actually has negative effects. So it's not simply all jobs of any sort. There do seem to be certain aspects of work that matter most in creating those meaningful conditions.
I think most of us would agree that when a job loss does occur, it can place a lot of stress on a marriage, which then also negatively affects your family as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. Evidence seems to show that there's a significant increase in divorce that comes with job loss and unemployment. Other negative things that accompany job loss as well, increased abuse, neglect, that gets passed on to the children as well. You see it, that children whose parents lose work often don't do as well as school. That means they're losing earnings, they're losing potential for the long run. The effects of work aren't just felt by individuals, they go into the families and it also expands into the community as well.
Now, you touched on this earlier as well, Brian, that job loss is also associated with earlier death, and with that increases in child neglect, heart disease, and even traffic accidents. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the things that you wouldn't expect, right? Traffic accidents, you think, oh my goodness, why is that occurring? And no one knows the exact, that the evidence seems to show what's happening when the job loss happens. It doesn't explain why that occurs, but you can understand it, the sort of stress that comes with wondering, what are you going to do the next day? Your mind wanders, those types of things take place. And this is what we're trying to get at. We're trying to help businesses, trying to help labor organizations, trying to help government understand that there is so much more to work than simply the paycheck. And if we want to have good businesses, we want to have good labor organizations, we want to do good public policy, we want to account for the broad array of benefits and the broad array of bad things that happen when unemployment occurs.
And there's been study after study showing that in poor economic times, we see increases in crime, especially with the younger unemployed men.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a particular problem in Alberta right now. I'm not sure how much the audience will be aware, but 1 out of 5 young men between the ages of 15 and 24 in Alberta are out of work right now. And that's a real problem. Young men tend to be disproportionately affected for whatever reason by being out of work. And the resource sector, which we've done some research on, has employed a lot of those people who didn't go to college, didn't go to university, but could get a good, well-paid job doing something really meaningful, providing fuel for people's cars, for housing, for cooking, that type of work. And with the decline of the resource sector, and I think there's some policy implications around that too, that's had a disproportionate negative effect on young Albertan men, and I think that's something to pay attention to.
There are studies as well, Brian, that show people work harder if they believe in the mission of the company. Let's talk a bit about that.
That's right. That's the positive side of things. We've talked a lot about the sort of the downsides of being out of work, but in a place of work where people are on board with the mission of the organization, where they see the work that they're doing as meaningful and contributing to society, people tend to be actually a bit more productive. What's interesting is a lot of studies show that people who work in jobs where people care for others, there's a certain caring element, they're willing to work for less. And it simply shows, again, this is not something to say, look, make work meaningful so that you can pay your employees less. But what it means to say is that if you're an employer, you should be paying attention to whether or not your work is actually meeting those demands, the desire that people have that seems to be an innate desire for meaningful work that helps other people. And I think that's something for employers to pay attention to as they're thinking about the workplace.
Now, your report points out to an interesting aspect as well, that is, if employers paid more attention to the non-monetary aspects of work, it would also improve their recruitment and retention efforts. More and more two-income families want to prioritize work-family balance.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that's one of the things, right? This is one of the things we've talked about on a regular basis. There seems to be a happy circle between work and family, so that if you're working well, working stable, it contributes to a healthy family. There's all kinds of evidence to show that steady work for parents sort of ripples over into the children. They see that there's good work to be done. It helps on their school, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the balance. The flip side comes if you begin to say, okay, work is the best thing, and you start doing it all the time. Workaholism isn't good for people. If you're not actually at home taking care of your children, you're not helping your family as well. So there seems to be, in the evidence at least, a little bit of a balance that the work and the family life needs to work together to enable each other to succeed and thrive.
Is there anything else specifically that employers can do to really help the lives of their employees, maybe by putting a foosball table in the lunchroom, or maybe bubble hockey? Those are one of my favorites, right?
Well, both of those things are wonderful. I also appreciate a ping pong table. Our office used to have one before we started growing. I think one of the things that is extremely important is for workplaces to ensure that workers' voices can be heard. That's one thing that comes up all the time. Workers want to be seen as people who are capable of making their own decisions, capable of contributing, and a workplace that enables and has structures in which workers' voices can be heard, that they're seen as contributing to not just producing things, but also contributing to the community as a whole. That's, I think, one of the key things that employers can do. Make sure that their workers' voices are heard and that they have an input, an actual legitimate input into the company.
Now, your report also talks about when downsizing, job sharing programs may help lessen some of the social and health issues that can result from job loss. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, this is one example where there are certain policies that can be put in place to try to mitigate the negative effects, right? So one example is during the Great Recession, many people were out of work, and there were certain employment insurance policies that were put in place where rather than cutting one full-time job, the government would subsidize hours for a number of people so that more people could stay employed. And that's the type of policy initiative that we think is helpful. So what ends up happening is that you're keeping more people at work. You're not taking the negative effects of just one or two people being totally out of work. You're spreading the risk a little bit, and you're spreading the pain in the hopes that the economy will pick up again. That's just one example of the type of pro-work policies that we think governments should be working for. And thankfully in Canada, we have a pretty good track record of that.
Do we have any information on how fellow workers would respond to job sharing? Would the more senior workers, for example, be okay with maybe sharing their hours with a rookie?
Yeah, we didn't do analysis on that, and that's a great question. I think again, that's one of those cases where if the workplace has a steady community and everybody understands that the company as a whole is suffering from hard times and that some of that burden needs to be shared, I can understand that would probably be a healthy thing, and to understand that certain families and others may need it. But that's another example where workplace community and voice, if those structures are in place to deal with that, you're probably going to have better results in the long run.
Now, what did the studies say when it comes to seniors, specifically the older generation? Should we stop working when we retire, or is it better to maybe keep working to some degree, give you maybe a sense of purpose?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, a lot of the literature does look at the effects of retirement. One thing that seems to be there is that when people retire and they sort of quit cold turkey, there's a significant loss of cognitive ability. So there seems to be some indication that being at work challenges your mind and challenges you to think and keeps your mind sharp. There's a sort of use it or lose it type of mentality that comes with work. So, it's not conclusive about whether you should retire, and different people will have different contexts and needs and so on. But there does seem to be some indication that when you're moving out of the workforce, there's a benefit to a slower, gradual transition. And there's also sort of an importance of doing other things that are going to keep your mind sharp. It's interesting. Retirement often and probably should be not an end of work, but an end of a particular type of work and ability to do other things that continue to challenge you and continue to enable you to create and contribute to society still.
You know what I'm wondering too at the same time, if you're pushed out of a position, your job, instead of maybe thinking about working, how about volunteering? As we talked about earlier, give you that sense of purpose, giving back to your community, sharing your experience, your knowledge, your wisdom, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are absolutely types of things. Volunteering actually is one of those things where it's actually work without money. It shows that, and the fact that people volunteer at all shows that there's much more to work than money. People volunteer at a variety of different places, whether it's a thrift store or at their local school. It's again another indication that work is something that people do for reasons that extend beyond the paycheck. If you can imagine, if everybody were to demand a paycheck for the volunteering that's done in this country, it's unlikely that we'd have soup kitchens. It's unlikely that we'd have as many extracurricular activities. It's guarantee you we wouldn't have any hockey teams unless you had a lot of people who could pay that. It just goes to show you again the importance of contributing and actually working in ways that extend benefits beyond yourself and to give back to others as well.
You know, and I remember the 80 Winter Olympics in Calgary, and if it wasn't for the volunteers, the thousands of volunteers, it wouldn't have been the huge success that it was too.
Absolutely. You can multiply that across countless examples, whether it's churches, schools, soup kitchens, hockey teams, races, art exhibits. They're just volunteering is an absolutely critical part to the Canadian society, and it's one that goes unrecognized, and it's extremely important. And we do some work on that as Cardis as well. I'd love to come back and talk to you about that sometime.
Brian Dykema is one of the writers of the report Work is About More Than Money, which is available at cardis.ca. Thanks for joining me today from Hamilton, Ontario.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.